My girlfriend and I had just moved into our new house, and honestly, it felt like a dream come true. It was everything we'd hoped for, bright, cozy, and finally ours. We even brought Bella with us, our rescue cat we'd adopted together, which made the whole place feel like home almost instantly. For the first few days, everything felt perfect. The only thing that slightly dampened the excitement was the house to our right. It looked abandoned, frozen halfway through renovations that clearly had been left unfinished for a long time. Exposed wood, missing fencing, like someone had simply walked away and never come back. Because of the layout, our back garden sat directly beside theirs. There should have been a fence separating the two, but it had been removed, apparently to be replaced, and never was. That meant anyone could walk freely between both gardens. Behind the abandoned house was another property, fully fenced off. We noticed a group of young men living there. Every now and then, when we came home, we'd see them cutting through the abandoned garden to reach the street. At first, we brushed it off. Maybe they knew the owner. Maybe they had permission. It didn't feel worth worrying about. Then came our first night. We were sitting in the back garden, enjoying the quiet, talking about how lucky we felt to finally be settled. Out of pure curiosity, we glanced toward the houses behind us, and that's when we saw him. A man stood at an upstairs window, staring straight at us. He wasn't trying to hide. He didn't move. His face was completely blank, and the room behind him was dark, making his presence feel even more unsettling. We tried to rationalize it. New neighbors attract curiosity, right? But after 30 minutes of being silently watched, the unease became impossible to ignore. We went inside. The next few days passed normally. I went to work, my fiancée stayed home unpacking, and we tried to settle into a routine. One evening, we decided to sit in the garden again. It was dark, the stars were out, and for a while, everything felt calm. Then we heard movement, wood scraping against wood. The makeshift fence board shifted, and suddenly 3 men were standing there, just inside our garden, staring at us. "Are you okay?" I asked, mostly because the silence felt unbearable. One of them, the youngest, maybe around 29, was holding a large bag. We had no idea what was inside. He casually offered us stolen washing-up tablets. We declined. I laughed awkwardly and made a joke, trying to ease the tension. He smiled, said okay, and they left. What stayed with me wasn't the offer. It was how easily they'd walked into our space. No greeting, no hesitation, like they belonged there. We convinced ourselves it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. They started coming into our garden more often, uninvited, lingering, watching, behaving in ways that felt deliberate and threatening. They'd lift the fence separating the back gardens and walk through the abandoned house like it was a corridor. I should mention, we're both 20 years old. And the more it happened, the harder it was to ignore the feeling that we weren't just being inconvenienced. We were being sized up. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the front room, I noticed 2 police officers walking down the side of our house and into the abandoned garden next door. They lifted the loose fence panel, scanned the area for a few minutes, then left without speaking to us. It felt unsettling, but I tried not to dwell on it. I assumed the men who had been cutting through the garden were already known to the police, and that whatever was happening didn't directly involve us. A few days later, there was a knock at the door. This time, the officers explained everything. The house behind us was now empty. The men who had been living there had been evicted for antisocial behavior. Not just toward us, but towards several neighbors as well. Hearing that was a huge relief. Even though nothing physical had happened, the situation had been escalating, and knowing they were gone felt like a weight lifting off our shoulders. We finally allowed ourselves to relax and focus on settling into the house properly. That sense of safety didn't last. One evening, while I was in the bath, a loud bang echoed outside. My stomach dropped. I rushed to get dressed and ran through the house, calling for my girlfriend. I found her in the spare bedroom, phone raised, recording through the window that overlooked the empty garden. When I asked what was happening, she hushed me, her face pale. After a moment, she explained that a man we'd never seen before had been standing in the garden, pointing up at our bedroom window. When he realized she'd spotted him, he sprinted toward our house. On his way past, he tried our front door handle, then ran back into the garden, shoved the broken fence aside, and began violently banging on the windows of the vacant house. We called the police immediately. They arrived, watched the footage, took our statements, and left. But the questions wouldn't stop racing through our minds. Why had he tried our door first? Why break into the empty house afterward? What exactly had he intended to do? A few nights later, we were lying in bed when we heard it whistling. The kind of low, deliberate whistle used to harass women. I checked the time, 20:16 a.m. We stayed completely still, barely breathing, until we heard light tapping against our window. Panic set in. We checked the security cameras, but for some reason, nothing had been recorded. Whoever it was disappeared as suddenly as they'd arrived, but neither of us slept that night. The next day, we packed a bag and went to my mom's, desperate for one night where we felt safe. When we returned the following morning, our fear was confirmed. Our Ring doorbell had been ripped off and placed neatly on the ground. The SD card was missing. Someone had come back deliberately, and we both knew exactly who it had to be. We called the police again. They told us to keep every door and window locked at all times. The woman on the phone hesitated before adding that removing the camera could be a sign of planning. That was the moment it truly hit us. This wasn't random anymore. At least the officer had been honest. The whistling, the banging, the attempts to come back onto the property, it all continued for weeks. We filed report after report, clinging to the hope that documenting everything would eventually make it stop. They never tried the door again, and for a while we convinced ourselves the worst had passed. Then, 3 weeks later, we were in bed watching silly clips from our camera recordings, trying to distract ourselves. Out of habit, we opened the live feed. That's when my stomach dropped. A man was standing outside our garden. He wore a black mask pulled up over his mouth and nose, his hood drawn tight. His arms were stretched wide, unnaturally still, like he was mimicking Jesus on the cross. His head was tilted as he stared directly up at our bedroom window. We couldn't move. At that point, we had moved the camera inside so nothing was recorded. We were so shocked it didn't even occur to us to screen record the feed. After a moment he spoke, but there was no audio. Then he calmly turned, crossed to the other side of the street, and stood there unmoving, staring at our house for nearly 30 minutes. We called the police again. This time, they told us that staring at someone's home wasn't illegal. When we explained what he'd done on our lawn, the response felt dismissive, almost annoyed, like we were wasting their time. We were left feeling embarrassed and completely unprotected. Sleep became impossible. Every sound outside, cars passing, branches scraping, footsteps, sent us into panic. Then at 20:52 one night, my phone buzzed with a notification. I shook my girlfriend awake and whispered, "Someone's outside. I know it. Please check the camera." She opened the feed, and there they were. 2 masked men crept along the side of our house, shining flashlights directly into our windows. One of them was unmistakable. It was the same man who'd been tormenting us for weeks, and in his hand was what looked like a crowbar. My heart was pounding so hard it felt unreal. Why us? What did they want? After that, the behavior became routine. He'd stand across the street for hours, pointing, waving, shouting things we couldn't hear. Every time we looked back, he'd lock eyes with us, completely expressionless. It was calculated. He wanted us to know he was there and that he could come back anytime. We kept calling the police. Very little changed. The harassment hasn't stopped. We've installed more cameras and record everything now, but it doesn't bring comfort. It just proves how powerless we feel. Earlier today, he was outside again, standing still, staring up at our window. We caught it on video. We're terrified, and if anything else happens, we'll update. Before I go any further, I need to say this plainly: I'm not insane. I know how this sounds: paranoid, unhinged, like the kind of story you dismiss before it even finishes, but everything I'm about to tell you is real. It didn't start with voices or threats. It started with faces. Or rather, different faces that all felt wrong in the exact same way. 3 months ago, I ended things with my ex Caleb. We'd been together nearly 2 years, and the breakup should have happened long before it did. He wasn't violent. He never hit me. But he was controlling in a quiet, methodical way, the kind that creeps in so slowly, you don't realize you're trapped until you already are. He tracked when I was on my phone, tested me by asking the same questions on different days just to see if my answers would change. It was subtle, calculated, exhausting. When I left, I erased myself. New number, no social media, new apartment. I truly believed I'd escaped him. Then came the barista. It was a Tuesday morning at a small coffee shop near my new place, one I'd only visited once or twice before. As I stepped up to the counter, the barista, a girl about my age, smiled, tilted her head slightly, and said, "Good morning, sunshine." My entire body went cold. That was Caleb's nickname for me, not a common one. He used it when he wanted to needle me, usually when I was already upset. "What's wrong, sunshine?" he'd say, enjoying the reaction. I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence. A few days later, I ordered a rideshare to work. Different driver than usual. Older guy, maybe in his 50s. He kept studying me in the rearview mirror like he was trying to place my face. Then, casually, he asked, "So, did you ever figure out what you were running from?" I stared at him and said, "What?" He just laughed softly and shook his head, like we were sharing a private joke. Caleb had said that exact sentence once, leaning in, dead serious, after I told him I needed space to find myself. After that, it didn't stop. A woman at the grocery store bumped into me and murmured, "You don't get to just disappear." A man passing me on the sidewalk said, "Still wearing your hair like that." Someone who worked in my building hummed a song Caleb used to play during our arguments and said, "You always liked this one." It wasn't their faces that terrified me. They were all different. It was their eyes. The same knowing look, like they recognized me, or thought they did. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. What other explanation could there be? So I did something I swore I never would. I reached out to Caleb. Not directly. I reached out to his sister. I asked her, calmly, carefully, to tell him to stop. In my head it made sense. Maybe he'd hired a private investigator. Maybe he was stalking me through other people, feeding them details, turning strangers into messengers. I didn't care how it was happening. I just wanted it to end. She replied the next day, "I don't know what you're talking about. Caleb's in rehab. He's been there 6 weeks." No phone. I didn't believe her. I assumed she was protecting him. That lasted until a week later when she posted a photo on Facebook. Caleb looked gaunt, hollowed out, holding one of those one-day sober chips. He looked gone. Whatever was happening, it wasn't him, at least not in any direct way. Still, the feeling wouldn't leave me. These people knew things they shouldn't have known. One night, I stayed late at work. I didn't want to go home. Nothing bad had happened inside my apartment, but it no longer felt like a place meant for one person. Around 10 p.m., I finally forced myself to leave. The walk was only 10 minutes. I kept my head down, headphones in, no music playing. Something I'd learned to do so I could hear footsteps if they followed too closely. When I turned onto my block, I saw someone sitting on the stoop across the street. A young man, hood up, head lowered. I would have ignored him if he hadn't spoken. Called out, "Tonight, sunshine!" I stopped dead. He never looked up, just stared at the concrete like it was giving him instructions. I walked past him without saying a word, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Once inside, I locked every bolt, every latch. I sat on the couch for hours, lights off, listening to silence until exhaustion finally took me. The next morning, my doormat was flipped upside down. That alone might sound harmless, but I live on the top floor. You don't pass my door by accident. On the underside of the mat, someone had written in pen, "You can change your face too if you want, but I'll still recognize you." I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't need to. I threw up in the sink. That same day, I booked a hotel for the weekend. I left without packing anything, not even clothes. I just needed to be somewhere with people, somewhere visible. The clerk gave me a room on the 4th floor. It was small, quiet, a little stuffy. For the first time in weeks I felt safe, until around 20 p.m. That's when someone knocked on my door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I sat upright in bed and didn't move. After a long pause, they knocked again, same rhythm, same patience. I crept over and looked through the peephole. A woman stood there, maybe in her 40s. Her face was completely blank, like all expression had been switched off. She wasn't looking around, wasn't shifting her weight, just staring straight at the door. She didn't say a word. I didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, she turned and walked away. It was one of the most unsettling things I've ever experienced. The next morning, I asked the front desk if anyone had come up to my room overnight. They looked confused and told me no one should have been on that floor at all, especially that late. Every other room up there was vacant. That's when it finally clicked. These people weren't random. They were being sent, fed information, given phrases Caleb used, specific ones, intimate ones. And if it wasn't Caleb himself, then who and how? I thought about him in rehab. About how obsessed he was with control, with making sure I never fully slipped out of his orbit. He didn't need to be the one knocking on my door. He just needed other people to do it for him. I started digging through my memories, and one conversation resurfaced from months before we broke up. Caleb once talked about a forum he was part of, a place where people shared tactics. He framed it like productivity advice or self-improvement. He never gave me a name, but looking back it sounded wrong. cultish. Like role play taken way too seriously, except now it wasn't pretend. It was happening to me. Someone, probably Caleb, had outsourced himself, paid or convinced people to repeat his words, mimic his patterns, so even when he was gone, I could never really escape him. It wasn't stalking in the traditional sense. It was psychological graffiti, like he'd sprayed pieces of himself onto strangers so every face became suspect. I don't think it's about watching me. I think it's about making sure I never stop watching for him. I moved again, deleted my social media, dyed my hair. I told my friends not to tell anyone where I was. For a while it worked, until last week. I was walking home from a bookstore when a woman passed me and said, still hiding behind books, "Sunshine." She never slowed down, never even looked at me. I don't think this will ever stop. Maybe he paid for a year of it. Maybe it's public now. Maybe this is some sick underground game. Who can scare Sunshine the best? Who can get the closest without touching? I don't trust faces anymore, and the constant paranoia is slowly destroying me. My family has always been a group of homebodies. We don't really travel, so when my aunt suddenly suggested a trip to one of Michigan's Great Lakes, it caught everyone off guard. Still, we agreed. It felt like a chance to do something different, to make memories we didn't already have. My cousins somehow managed to book an Airbnb big enough for all 18 of us, which alone felt suspiciously lucky for the price. The house sat right on the shoreline, with sweeping lake views that stretched so far they almost looked like the ocean. Most of us took rooms in the main house, but with a group that large, a few of us were placed in a second building behind it, a 2-story garage with bedrooms upstairs. 3 of my cousins and I were assigned to sleep there. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. We spent the day in the hot tub, walking the beach, and enjoying the scenery, barely thinking about where we'd be sleeping. That changed once night fell. When we finally went into the garage, the place felt wrong. It was outdated and clearly neglected. The bathrooms were carpeted and smelled faintly of mold. The bed linens were stained, the latch on the door felt flimsy, and it was obvious the cleaners had focused on the main house and ignored this building entirely. My cousins were disgusted and refused to sleep on the beds without washing the sheets first. I suggested we do laundry. The machines were small though, and could only handle 1 set of sheets at a time. We realized pretty quickly that we'd be up late. Around midnight, the bell downstairs rang, signaling the wash was done. I went down alone, moved the sheets to the dryer, and carried the clean, warm bedding back upstairs. Once my cousins saw how fresh they were, they wanted theirs washed too. So I kept going up and down the stairs, cycle after cycle. While waiting for the next load, we sat upstairs talking. My cousin Maria complained about how we'd gotten stuck with the worst sleeping arrangement, and as she spoke, an uneasy feeling crept over me. It was that rare kind of intuition I've had before, the kind that usually ends in a nightmare or something worse. I told my cousins to stay alert. They took me seriously, especially since we'd all experienced a break in years earlier when we lived in Detroit. By around 20:37 a.m., we were finally finished. We made the beds and collapsed, completely exhausted. My cousin Nikki insisted we leave a light on. Everyone else fell asleep quickly, but I stayed awake, scrolling through schoolwork on my phone. I've always been a light sleeper since the break. In and even half asleep, I stayed hyper-aware of every sound. Then around 30:00 a.m., a massive bang slammed into the garage door, like someone had thrown their entire body against it. I jolted upright. My cousins didn't move. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, even though the sound was far too heavy. I stayed quiet, forcing myself to lie still. A few minutes later, it happened again. The same deafening crash, this time shaking the entire garage. The walls rattled. I was fully awake now, staring at the softly lit room while my cousins slept on. No animal, no gust of wind could cause that. About 20 minutes later, the third impact hit. The building trembled, and this time 2 of my cousins shot upright. I asked if they heard it, already knowing the answer. Nikki whispered, "What was that?" I told her it was the 3rd time I'd heard it. We all agreed there was no way wind could make that sound. Nikki texted her mom, my aunt, at 4:11 a.m. She replied, clearly alarmed, and woke my uncle. He ran outside to check the property while we stayed frozen upstairs, too afraid to move. When we finally heard knocking, it was my uncle at the door, standing there with my dad and a few of our older male cousins. That's when I knew it was serious. There was no wind, no prank. My uncle told us to grab our things and head to the main house. Then he said there was someone on the property. My stomach dropped. I shoved everything into my suitcase, and we all rushed out of the garage. Once we were inside the main house, most of the family had already woken up from the noise and chaos. We gathered in the living room, exhausted and shaken, trying to make sense of everything. I explained that I'd heard the first 2 crashes, and my cousins confirmed the third. That's when my aunt filled in the rest. When my uncle went outside to investigate, she followed a few steps behind him. He shouted, "Hey," towards someone standing behind the garage. At that exact moment, the door to the main house slammed shut behind her hard. There was no wind, no explanation. Panicking that someone might have slipped inside, she ran to wake my dad and the others. They searched the house, but no one was there. Then my uncle described what he saw. A man was standing behind the garage. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't moving. He stood there like he wanted to be noticed. When my uncle called out to him, the man didn't react, no flinch, no hesitation. He simply turned, walked away and vanished. Not into the shadows, not behind anything, just gone. There were no crunching leaves, no footsteps fading into the distance. And my uncle isn't someone who exaggerates or tells stories. He's practical, level-headed, logical. Hearing fear in his voice made the situation far more disturbing. My brothers then mentioned something else. They'd found 2 jester playing cards. One was in the main house, the other was in the garage. The one in the garage looked twisted, almost demonic. One of my cousins pointed out that jesters symbolize mockery, and the loud crashes had started around 30 AM, what some call the devil's hour. It felt deliberate, like we were being toyed with. My uncle had even checked the ground for footprints. He found only his own and my cousin's. Nothing else. Another cousin had driven up and down the road during the incident, trying to spot someone running away, but the road was completely empty. After that, no one went back to the garage. We crammed into the main house, sleeping wherever there was space, floors, couches, chairs. My mom gave up her bed so we could be more comfortable. On the second night, she slept on the couch near the large windows. Around 40 AM, she woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. She didn't open her eyes. She was terrified of seeing someone staring back at her through the glass. Then she heard someone trying the basement door. The lock was weak, and my brothers and male cousins were sleeping downstairs. The handle rattled violently, like someone was testing it, trying to force it open. My mom rushed toward the basement, but by the time she reached the beachside entrance, the noise had stopped. No one was there. The boys were still asleep. That was our final night. We'd planned to stay until Tuesday, but we left on Monday. The entire drive home, we talked nonstop, replaying every detail. When my mom learned that I'd been going downstairs alone all night doing laundry, she suggested someone might have been watching me and assumed I was the only one in the garage. The timing between my last trip downstairs and the first bang lined up too perfectly to ignore. Theories started flying. Some believed it was a nearby resident trying to scare us off. Others were convinced something paranormal was involved, especially because of the jester cards. My aunt pointed out that a normal person would have run when confronted. This man didn't. He watched. Then he disappeared. We contacted the Airbnb host, who said she'd checked the camera above the garage door. She never followed up. That raised more questions. Did she know the man? Was he a neighbor? When we first arrived, my sister and cousin had walked the beach and passed a woman from the house next door. She'd stared at them coldly, no greeting, no friendliness. The property was isolated, and we understood that constant Airbnb guests might frustrate locals. But we'd been respectful. We didn't deserve what happened. This was our first family trip, and hopefully, it won't be our last, even after everything.